Ron Howard, by all accounts, is the hardest man in Hollywood not to like. As a child and teenage actor, he starred in two of the enduring TV sitcoms in television history, The Andy Griffith Show and Happy Days. But Howard always wanted to direct. In Night Shift, he introduced us to Michael Keaton. In Splash, he cast Tom Hanks and John Candy. Parenthood with Stephen Martin solidified Howard as one of the top directors in the business. His latest is an affectionate look at the hard-boiled world of New York City tabloid newspapers with Keaton, Robert Duvall, Glenn Close, and Jason Robards. I'm very pleased to have Ron Howard here for a conversation about this film and the craft of directing. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank
you. And 9 years old, you knew what you were going to be, an actor and a producer, and you were going to write your own stuff?
A couple of years later,
Precocious there you were, Mr. Howard.
Well, you know, I grew up in that environment, and I absolutely loved what I saw. It didn't take me long to see that the director was the person who kind of got to, you know, stick his nose into everything, and that looked like fun to me.
So early on, even when you were Opie,
right,
you had some sense.
Oh yeah.
Of wanting to learn about the business behind the scenes in order to direct.
We had a director on the show named Bob Sweeney.
Yeah.
And he'd been had a long career as a character actor, and then he'd become a director later in his life. And so he always talked about acting and directing, the two together. And I think that in a lot of ways sort of inspired me. Later, the guy who directed all the Happy Days episodes, this fellow Jerry Paris,
yeah.
Great, funny man, brilliant, would always talk about that. So to me, it seemed like kind of a logical progression.
But even then, I mean, to become the director you've become, you were listening and thinking and talking and asking questions. I mean, it seems to me that when I read about you, what is a part of your essence is a curiosity.
Well, I mean, I think that's what's great about the job. I'm not a very adventuresome person by nature, but the job forces me into a lot of situations where I can learn a lot and see a lot. But that environment on the Andy Griffith Show was very collaborative, and the actors were invited to stay and sit around at story sessions and speak their mind. And even as a child, I was allowed to be in on those meetings. And so as a literally 7, 8, 9-year-old kid, I was in a position of occasionally being able to throw out a suggestion or two.
Any, though, creative impulses that are not satisfied by directing, so that even now, occasionally you say, boy, I'd like to go back and play at least a cameo role, at least something that comes along?
Once in a while. I'll tell you, there are a few times when acting looks pretty good to me. When we're behind schedule
Way over
and the
budget
rain clouds are coming over the hill, and I see the actors like getting under the umbrellas and heading to the trailer, acting looks pretty good to me then. Also, when I do a movie that is really an actor's movie, like The Paper, you see all these good actors going at it, having a ball. I know what that feels like, and that's a lot of fun. But I had a great time directing that picture too.
How crucial is a director's work to a maximum performance by an actor?
You know. Well, you know, there are so many ways to skin the cat on that one. I mean, first of all, William Wyler was quoted, I believe, as saying that 90% of directing is working on the script, getting a good cast, and then knowing how to stay the hell out of the way once you've got those two things in place. And I think you can definitely over-direct. And there are some directors who don't deal with the actors that much, but they're very meticulous in their casting, and their actors always give marvelous performances. So, you know, there are so many ways to approach the job. That's one of the fascinating things.
And you approach each actor, I assume, with different. You know the buttons to push,
well,
or not to push, in order to maximize the performance of a particular actor.
Yeah, you try. You know, I mean, like a coach or any kind of motivator. You try to get a sense of the people that you're working with and what they're going to respond to or not respond to. And that's where my experience as an actor really does come in handy, because I've acted in scenes with so many different types, people who work in so many different styles.
So here comes an actor who says, listen, I'm motivated, I know the way this character ought to play this scene,
right,
and it's not what's in your mind,
right,
and it's not what's on the script.
Uh-huh.
What do you do?
Well, it happens. It happens. Usually at that point, I'd want to see the person play it through.
His way.
His
or
way.
Her way.
His
right.
or her way. Let me see what they're talking about.
Right.
Sometimes what they're articulating may be a little bit more extreme than what they're actually executing. They may not be quite as, they may be further off in theory than they are in practical sense. In that case, if that is the case, then I say nothing, because I really believe that if actors are working on an idea that they understand, that they believe in, that they're going to do better work than if they're trying to somehow execute somebody else's idea. But if in fact they're taking the scene off in some direction that really isn't working, then I would go in and probably over a period of a few takes, maybe 5 or 6 takes, start to shift it. Start to shift it and say, well, here's, but for the scene to work, I would always go back to the scene. We need to accomplish this, and I'm not sure that attitude's going to be consistent with such and such a scene. If I can't make those arguments, if I actually can't make those arguments, then I'm probably wrong in invading the performance. I should probably leave it alone, even though it's not quite what I had in mind.
Yeah. And you at least do one as scripted, too. I mean, let's do it the way that it's written at least once.
Yeah, you always can move in that direction. Although one of the best scenes that I've ever been involved in, I had virtually nothing to do with. It was a scene in Cocoon. And Wilford Brimley, who's a great, brilliant improvisational actor, is talking to his grandson. And that was a movie about senior citizens who were eventually going to, it was a fantasy, they were going to get to go off in a spaceship and never get old and never die. And this is basically the conversation he's having with his grandson, a goodbye scene. Nicely written. Wilford Brimley, kind of a crusty character, came up to me and said, we could shoot that scene in about 15 minutes. But why don't you just let me talk to the boy? And so I took it to mean that he wanted to improvise it a little bit. And I laid down exactly the ground rule you're talking about. I said, well, Wilford, that'd be all right, but I just as long as you're okay with my ultimately saying, let's do the scene, let's have one as scripted.
Yeah.
He said, okay. We went out, got a couple of different cameras set up, and just let him go. We did 3 or 4 takes, absolutely mesmerizing, and never got anywhere near the script, and nor did I have any desire to.
That reminds me, even though it's not exactly the same point, Gore Vidal in Bob Roberts, the film, with Tim Robbins, and Robbins sat there and sort of crouched behind, and Gore Vidal just started talking, playing the role of a crusty old senator who was about to lose. And it was wonderful, and it was all ad-lib. It was a little bit like what Brimley did there.
Well, on a much smaller scale, I've learned over the last few films, it's been kind of recent, to do more of that kind of work. Not so much with the lead actors, because you work the script, you want it to play well, you'd like to get it down on paper. Then if the improvisation could take it to another level, great. But I did a movie a couple of years ago called Backdraft, which is about firefighters. Right. I found it to be a huge advantage to have a bunch of firefighters come and be in the movie, play small parts, be extras, things like that. They could tell you when you were missing the mark. When you needed an improv line, a tossed-in line, it was accurate, and it meant a lot to the actors to be hanging around with the real firefighters. On this movie, which was a movie about journalism, the paper, we did the same thing. Wound up having a lot of journalists involved, and then in a later sequence, there's a medical crisis, and so we had our technical advisors come in and start talking through the scene. Finally, I just said, look, you two fellas, it was an OB and an anesthesiologist, just do it. Just do the scene. We're just going to shoot you guys. Forget a script. Don't worry about writing anything down. Let me just see what you do. And we wound up getting a pretty extraordinary sequence that way.
How many of those people, real-life journalists, publishers, owners, columnists, broadcasters, have been thinking that as they did their role, that they're going to end up with a nice piece in this film and ended up on the cutting room floor?
a few wound up on the cutting room floor, I will say, and I had to send off little notes of apology. Thanks for helping us out, but not unlike Kevin Costner in his first couple of roles, you landed on the editing room floor.
Was Kevin Costner was in Big Chill, wasn't it?
Big Chill, and all that was left was a shot of his wrist and one insert of his wrist.
Where did the idea for the paper come from?
The screenwriters, 2 brothers, David Koepp, who's a screenwriter by trade, and Stephen Koepp, who's a Nation editor at Time magazine, decided they'd work on a script together and they'd do it about New York tabloid journalism. And I heard about it when they were just about to wrap up the first draft.
Did David write Jurassic Park?
Yeah, he wrote the screenplay for Jurassic Park, also Carlito's Way. Right. Very strong screenwriter. I heard about it, And actually, I was in a meeting with him, and he was asking me a lot of questions about the movie Parenthood, and because he said he was doing a project that was multiple character, multiple storyline kind of a piece, not unlike Parenthood, and he'd seen the movie a few times and read the script, and we were talking about the problems of that kind of structure. And I said, well, what's it about? He said, well, it's 24 hours in a New York City newspaper.
Yeah.
And I have been looking for a journalism story, a newspaper story, for years. I've noodled around with storylines, I've read scripts that I didn't find satisfactory, and always just kind of kept it on my wish list. So I didn't reveal too much, but I did say, let me take a look at that if you don't mind. And I love the script. It was a terrific first draft.
And then you buy this, then you, as I guess the producer, because your company is in the business of making movies.
Brian Grazer is a producer. He's my partner.
Films,
right?
Yeah. And so you guys go buy the script. Right?
In this case, it was already at Universal, which is where we do the lion's share of our work anyway. And so the studio said, great. It's just
now, between that day and the beginning of photography, when you're here in New York shooting, how long?
Well, quick, because it was such a strong first draft. That happened sort of late February, and we were shooting July 15th.
Wow, that's quick, isn't it?
That's very quick.
Because you hear about projects just languish,
yeah.
and you option the damn thing, and then you wait and wait and wait.
Well, I mean, it's not unusual at all for a project to take. I mean, an average is 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. And then to prepare for it. What do you, as a director, do?
Well, in this case, I got to have some fun because my job became to go and hang around newspaper offices, newsrooms, and I'd been a co-editor of my high school paper, and so for me it was kind of like fantasy camp. Suddenly I found myself hanging around the New York Post and the Daily
Ron
News.
Howard, actor director, is just going to hang out and listen and go to lunch with us and watch what we do and ask 1,000 questions.
Go to the editorial meetings. I got my own little reporter's notepad, and they all got a kick out of that. But I picked up an awful lot. And I found the movie started to get a lot funnier, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
because
always
you
a
realized
comedy
the characters
drama.
in journalism were funny, or
they were smart and funny, and kind of in a sort of a wiseacre kind of a way, and in a cynical way, and that was consistent with the tone that they'd written. But I just realized that we could push it further and still be in keeping.
Yeah. And this is one 24-hour period in the life of a newspaper.
Yeah.
What would you want to capture about this business of a daily newspaper, and in this case, a tabloid?
Well, it's really
the energy, the passion, the sense that it's involved in all this sort of
all those, the pressure.
Yeah.
See, to me, I really love that it's a newspaper story and a behind-the-scenes look at the headline business and all that, and I find that fascinating. But as a storyteller, wanting to make this is a Hollywood movie, I wanted to reach a lot of people and speak to a lot of people. What really appealed to me was the fact that what these characters were undergoing during this day was very relatable stuff. That the pressure that they were feeling, while heightened because of the immediacy of that deadline, which is a great thing for a movie, but that the stories, the problems that they were coping with during this 24 hours were issues that we all face one way or another, particularly if you're in any kind of a competitive job environment. So I thought we had two things going for us.
How is my job affecting my family's life?
Yeah.
How
has it affected
how
in
am I
the
competing
past?
with my opponents and people who are my colleagues, but at the same time we're all looking for the next prize, the next promotion, the next best story.
Where do you, where do you draw the line? Where do you compromise? Where do you not? Have I compromised too much during the course of my life? Not enough?
Yeah.
So the script dealt with all these things comedically. Which I think is a great way to address a lot of issues, so the movie never becomes too dark or chiding or anything, but I think it does in fact speak to those issues.
And for you, in terms of the things you've been done recently, it's a turn to character type. It's a real
it's a real return. I mean, I love
return, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think of myself as an actor's director first and foremost, and I. I have a lot of laughs hanging around with actors. They're kind of a disparate group and sensibilities, but I find them fascinating and interesting. And here was a movie where that was my job: hang out with the actors, work with them, help them realize these performances.
A little bit about, before I see a clip, a little bit about casting. You've got Robert Duvall plays
the editor-in-chief.
You got Glenn Close plays
managing editor.
Managing editor. Michael Keaton is
the Metro editor, and Glenn and Robert are his bosses.
And Quaid is the columnist?
Columnist Marissa Tomei is married to Michael Keaton and has also been a reporter, and she's just taken maternity leave.
All right, roll. This is a scene. Set this up before we roll.
Oh.
This is the morning editorial meeting.
Yeah, and there's some intensity going on here because Michael Keaton's wanting to push one story, and everybody else on the editorial staff believes they ought to go in another direction, and that they don't quite have the information to really chase that story.
All right, here it is. Roll tape. Yes. Now, is Robert Duvall patterned after a character in the same way? You know, and it wasn't patterned after it was a real-life character because it was not fiction, it was non-fiction.
Right, right.
Jason Robards played Ben Bradley. Is there a character who you've got Duvall
I think the Koepp brothers bumped into a couple of guys,
yeah.
and heard a lot of stories about legendary editors, yeah. and concocted the Duvall character.
People like Jerry Nachman, who used to be at the New York Post.
I know they talked to Jerry Nachman,
yeah.
And talked about a number of other guys, and,
yeah.
and we were able to do a lot of. You know, I mean, these meetings, these sequences, some of my favorite sequences in the movie, because they sort of turn on a dime. I mean, they're kind of funny and irreverent, and then all of a sudden they get serious and
yeah.
issue-oriented. And they changed and evolved a lot as I spent time at these meetings, and the writers, obviously, and even as the actors started to come in, taking their own notes.
What is interesting about this is the ensemble that you create here. I mean, some of you worked with before. Why so many stars, other than stars bring people into the theater?
Well, stars do bring people into the theater, but also stars become stars because they're magnificent. They're great actors, and so as a greedy director, eager to make every scene as exciting or entertaining as possible, if you can get these people to be in your movie, I think it's only an advantage.
Take us to that scene we just saw.
Right.
How many days shooting is that?
That actually was about a day and a half shooting, and what you saw was the tail end of about a 5 or 6 minute scene.
All taking place in one room, but you
yeah.
got to do close-ups and reverses and all that stuff.
You know, a number of setups. We used 2 cameras. Also, the style of the movie kind of evolves during the course of the picture. It goes from a very sort of straightforward style of shooting, which was pretty simple, to a little more hectic, frantic, cinematic style.
Yeah. And how many times, the number of scenes that you shot,
right.
Did you get it near the end, or you got it in the beginning, and
Bits
it
and
turns
pieces.
out that it didn't get much better after all the repeat shots that you took?
Well, you never can tell. What we were doing in a lot of instances is running straight through the scene, the full 6-7 minute scene. Duvall kept saying, it's like doing a one-act play over and over and over again.
When are we going to get this, Howard?
Well, the interesting thing about this scene is that the actors, this is a trick that I borrowed actually from George Lucas, who directed a movie I did years ago, American Graffiti. The actors never really knew when they were on or off because the cameras were sort of roving around. So they just fell into this very naturalistic, very honest kind of rhythm, and it didn't seem to bother them how many times we did it. But I'll bet you we did that scene 40 or 50 times.
40 or 50 times?
Yeah, by the time we did all the different angles.
Yeah, all right. Let me take another look. This is the men's room scene. Tell me about this.
Oh, well, Glenn Close is having a very bad day, and she's feeling a lot of financial stress and strain and pressure. Didn't have any luck when her conversation with Duvall, decided to take the issue up with the publisher, played by Jason Robards, and it proves to be kind of an awkward situation.
Roll
for her.
tape. Here it is from the paper. I didn't see my pal Costas there, did I?
Yes, you certainly did, yeah. Well, that was a black tie event, and because we had so many newspaper cameos in the movie, I wanted to show that this was an all-media event, this evening gala. So I actually, that's also Kurt Loder peeking over the, the stall.
Who have you learned, who's helped you understand this craft of making movies?
You know, I learned something every single movie, and I write them down in my journal, try to keep track, and every time I start a new one, I feel like I know almost nothing. I mean, I have a little experience to fall back on, but once you get on the set and start working, it always seems to be a new set of issues and a new set of concerns and problems. But when I think back, I definitely learned a lot working as an actor for George Lucas. He's not a real actor's director, but he...
What is he then?
First of all, great with script,
Right.
great with editing,
And
but he
understand.
also creates an environment, a whole environment. So whatever he's doing, whether it's a science fiction piece or an adventure or a movie about the 50s, you know, the environment it creates an entire universe that you believe, and he has a tremendous eye for detail and attention to detail, which I coming out of television really needed to learn about, because television is all faces and the most conventional kind of editing. I learned a lot fairly recently. I think I learned a lot directing Robert De Niro. I found his
About directing or about acting?
well about the
Making
whole
movies.
process, the whole
Yeah.
his approach to his character, and he was playing a supporting role, but his attention to detail and his research was so thorough and so interesting, and then the way he melded the research with sort of the dramatic issues of the story, I thought it was fascinating. It was fascinating to watch him do it and to work with him and be a part of that process, and I thought I learned a lot from that.
Have you changed in terms of the kinds of movies you want to make?
I think there's a sort of a natural and inevitable shift or evolution, only because I think that you do two movies for a couple of reasons. One, you need a picture and it's a good payday, or if you
need a picture as a good payday, meaning you've got to continue to impress on the financial people that you make movies that make money.
Or you might need the money.
Right.
You know. Now, fortunately, I'm not in that position right at this particular moment, and I have a lot of control over my career right now. So that leaves me in this other enviable situation of getting to do the movies that you feel some passion for, that you fall in love with, and as a result, I think as you change, as you mature, as you've made other kinds of movies, and you feel that you've covered that ground, the storylines and the subjects that you're going to fall in love with are going to shift and change also. And I feel that, but I try not to pursue it on a very intellectual level. And I also am not as calculating about the movie's about handicapping the ultimate box office on the movies as people might suspect. I've had luck at the box office, and I think my sensibility is pretty mainstream, and I do keep the audience in mind as I'm working, but I never know what the movie's going to do, and I don't choose based on that, because I think that could really backfire. I really go for things that I think I'm going to have an interesting time doing. It'll be entertaining for me, and it presents some new challenges.
Yeah. How many films do you make? One a year?
I can't really do one a year. It seems to average out about one every 16 to 18 months.
Yeah. And you're thinking about doing one now, I read somewhere, about the
Apollo 13
Apollo
mission.
13 mission,
Yeah.
Based on a book by one of the astronauts?
Jim Lovell. It's going to be fascinating, and much different from anything that I've done, in that it's straight drama and very factual.
Do you take off a time off after you go promote a film before you are into the next one, or are you already into what you're going to do next before you finish editing this one?
It depends entirely. In this particular instance, I'm already into pre-production on the Apollo 13 project. And sometimes my wife would like to see me take a little more time in between, and so would I on occasion. But it depends a little bit on actors' availabilities and what season of the year you want to shoot the movie, and when the good scripts
And you
arrive.
choose to live on the East Coast rather than California because of the kids?
Yeah, it's also, I just always wanted to try living someplace else, and I found that I really enjoyed it. Although, we as a family and me as an individual wind up spending a lot of time in LA still.
Great to have you.
Thank you
very much.
Yeah, nice
Good.
talking to you.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Ron Howard, the film is called The Paper, opening soon.
Yes.
Across America. We thank you for joining us this evening. Look forward to seeing you next time. See you then.